Are you a fan of competitive Pokemon? Are you tired of the same boring format? And are you ready for some action? If you answered yes to all those questions, then I have the series for you. My name is Ace Trainer Josh, and in this series we will embark on a 12-week odyssey, which will feature some of the best battlers the singles format has to offer. Except, this isn't just any singles Pokemon format. This is the Pokemon Draft League format. And for those who might be unaware of this format, I recommend you check out this video. However, if you don't want to watch all that, I'll give you the TLDR. The league consists of 16 battlers, and each battler is arranged into a randomized order of 1 through 16. And from there, each team will have to draft a Pokemon onto their team. Each team has a finite amount of points that they can spend, and each Pokemon is set to certain values based on how subjectively good they're considered by the majority. This organization of points with Pokemon and the points provided to the battlers is what makes the format unique and competitive. But with all that said, let's set the stage for the teams who will be fighting to prove that they're the best that ever was. I present to you the Discord Global Battle Association, also known as the DGBA. Before I begin, I want to mention that I'll be going through the teams in the order of which they drafted, meaning I'll begin with the team that picked first overall. I will also give a brief overview of each team without giving any subjective grades, but rather just mention the notable details about each team. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I present the Glop is Plop, coached by Glop. And yes, some of these team names are going to be rather lighthearted or goofy, but that just makes the league more creative and fun. Glop started the entire draft with pick 1 Chupow, which most would consider to be one of the strongest, if not the strongest Pokemon in the entire game offensively. He decided to pair it with other offensive threats such as Samurott Hisui, Cinderace, Lilligant Hisui, and Zapdos. He also has excellent ways of removing Stealth Rock for Chupow with Cinderace or Donphan. Another interesting detail is the plethora of good priority users Glop has in Cinderace, Chupow, Samurott, and even Ice Shard Donphan. I also really like having Zapdos, Cinderace, and even Baton Pass Doxbun as good pivot mons to get into Chupow. And even with all those offensive hitters, he still has Pokemon like Bronson, Doxbun, and even defensive Zapdos and Donphan to act as good defensive walls for certain matchups. With the second pick, we have Bronson, coach of the Ariana Grandes. He decided to use his second pick on Baxcalibur, which has proven to be one of the bigger setup threats in the game thanks to Terrazolizing. Speaking of Terra, there are specific rules in regards to Terrazolizing, but I'll cover that later in the video. He paired Baxcalibur with 2 controversial Pokemon in Espafra and Cyclizar, which is allowed to use the move Shed Tail. He also has an interesting new Pokemon in Cleaver, whose signature move Stone Axe is not only an attacking move, but also sets up Stealth Rock as a secondary effect. It'll be interesting to see how this Pokemon works with this crazy new move. Personally, I could see it working really well as a Sash Lead Rocker that obviously can't be taunted. And with offensive threats such as Gengar, Crocodile, and Magnezone to pair with the other offensive beast and good walls in Vaporeon and Chestnut, it's safe to say that this team will cause some headaches and prep for many battlers. With the third pick in the draft, we have the Styrofoam Squad, coached by 100P, who has a ton of experience in Smogon and has proven to be pretty good at draft as well. He decided to pick up Spectre, which learns Psychic and Draining Kiss in Generation 9, making it not a complete sitting duck against bulkier dark types. He also interestingly drafted Generation 9 Mew, which lost the moves Knockoff, Toxic, Roost, Defog, and Super Fang. I might be missing a few, but those are the notable moves. Definitely a huge nerf to what it can do, but it does force the Mew to be more offensive most weeks, which weirdly enough makes Mew more interesting, as its coverage is still tremendously large. He chose not to draft any real walls to go with his offensive Mew, which makes his team incredibly interesting. He also drafted Grimmsnarl, who could set up screens and Pardon Shot to bring in his plethora of sweepers, and Palmont, aka Mr. Revival Blessing, who could potentially bring back a setup Mew or Salamence from the dead to bring a game back from the clutches of defeat. Between you and me, I don't see many games going past 30 turns with a team like this. With the fourth pick in the draft, we have the big Dick Swannas, and yes, his logo is just a regular old swan. Coached by Toxic, aka Buff Boy E. Bro, I kid you not, this man's biceps are like the size of my thighs. Anyways, he went with pick 1 Dragapult, arguably one of the better offensive Pokemon due to its innate ability to dictate the game thanks to its massive speed and incredible offensive typing in Dragon Ghost. Similarly to 100P, Toxic's team is incredibly offensive and has no real walls outside of the coffee table. However, his team not only has a tremendous amount of pivot potential, but he has incredible physical wall breakers in Ursaluna, Roaring Moon, and Galarian Zapdos. Not to mention, I think Gyarados is one of the more slept on setup sweepers in the entire generation. Lastly, I want to shout out Glamora, as it's one of the best hazard setters in the game, thanks to its signature ability Toxic Debris, and having the ability to lay rocks and spikes. Overall, a really fun looking team. With the 5th pick in the draft, we have Astor Jay, who I have personally known for at least 6 years, a true OG in the format and the community. He's the coach of the Moncho Habsels. With the 5th pick in the draft, he drafted Chi-Yu, which in my opinion is a steal, as I believe it's a top 3 Pokemon in the entire game. His team also looks much bulkier than any of the teams we have reviewed so far, thanks to Pokemon such as Sylveon, Garganacl, and Fortress. I also appreciate how he has 3 really good Stealth Rockers, since it's a quality that could be forgotten to be included in a draft. In tandem with the Chi-Yu, he offensively pairs it with Quaquaval, Thundurus T, and Decidueye Hisui, an interesting string of Pokemon for the task. I do also love his responses to ground, rocks, and fightings, aka Chi-Yu's main offensive concerns. A funky team at glance, but a sound one. With the 6th pick in the draft, we have Paranox, coach of the Melbourne Castforms. A very good friend of mine, and one of 3 battlers from the land down under. He went with Great Tusk as his first pick, which I feel is a very fair spot for such a Pokemon. It can basically do anything within its realm of possibilities, whether it's defensive Stealth Rocker, an offensive choice set, or even a bulk up rapid spin set. Not to mention the combination of ground fighting is nearly impossible to switch into. And despite this being a full team of 12 Pokemon, I do sense that the team is rather top heavy, since I don't see his bottom 6 Pokemon coming to a lot of games. However, I am a firm believer in the Generation 9 Drifblim. But I also do want to mention that I do love his combination of Dragonite, Greninja, and Ceruledge as offensive beast, while it's also having Hatterene as a nice defensive pivot Pokemon. With the 7th pick in the draft, we have Habitat, who does not actually have a team logo, so we'll be referring to him as the unsponsored coach. Habitat used his first pick on Iron Valiant, a Pokemon that at first glance seems broken, but I believe is as good as the trainer is skilled, which makes it an interesting litmus Pokemon. Its main issue is bulky poison types such as Clodsire, which luckily gets nuked by the likes of Lander's Eye, which is allowed to have sheer force in this format. I also do like Rotom Wash, as it's one of the best pivot walls in the entire game, allowing for Iron Valiant and Landers to force pressure as often as possible. It also pairs well with Slowking Galar defensively. His Stealth Rockers could be a tad bit better, and I feel the second half of his draft is underwhelming, but the upper half provides a solid enough basis to make prep and play smooth if conducted properly. With the 8th pick and marking the halfway point of introduction, we have Ethan, coach of the Nashville Predators. I don't know too much about the guy, but he had previous success in the DGBA, and he's probably looking to continue performing well in the league. His first pick was Palafin, which is without saying an incredible Pokemon, and was actually on the championship winning team last season. He paired this Pokemon offensively with Gholdengo and Volcarona, which are not just both huge offensive threats, but Volcarona pairs extremely well with Palafin, being able to obliterate bulky grasses. With that said, I don't like how his offensive counter to bulky waters is Bramblegast. I also want to mention his walls in Clodsire and Dondozo, which he actually got with his last pick in the draft, and in my opinion is an absolute steal. They both work really well together, and Clodsire is one of the better defensive hazard setters in the entire game. Lastly, do not sleep on the Orform. He may not have Regenerator for those Shed Tails, but he can get them off on a lot of offensive types, and can realistically get 2 Shed Tails off with a Citrus Berry. The 9th pick in the DGBA draft, we have Troy, coach of the Orlando Meowstic. Personally, I would go with the Orlando Yellow Magic, but to each their own. He used his first pick on Urshifu Single Strike, which is considered as one of the more impressive physical attackers in the entire game. He paired it with Landorus T and Zoroark Usui for his main offensive core, which is interesting for either U-turn spam or just pure wall break potential with something like Choice Spec Zoroark into a Choice Band Urshifu, plus like Swords Dance Landers. Each Pokemon has really good utility for Choice Scarf too, which I like a lot. His wall core of Heatran, Slowking, Serena, and Florges is honestly really good considering the lack of good defensive fairy types in the current generation. And the combo of Slowking with Chilling Reception and U-turn Serena will allow for the hard hitters to go in. I also like that Florges makes up as the Cleric since Serena did lose Aromatherapy. I also love the potential of leading Zoroark Hisui as an Urshifu and just immediately hitting out the physical check to said Urshifu and opening the door to really start snowballing. He did pick up some value Pokemon after Serena, but I've seen most weeks consisting of the Pokemon I previously mentioned. With the 10th pick in the DGBA draft, we have Skyhorse, coach of the Sydney Convictinis. This man is personally a good friend of mine in the community as an absolute genius in the real world and in this game. I truly have nothing but respect and admiration for this man. He started his pick with pick 1, 28ST, which has been a staple for all draft formats for as long as the format has existed. It's an all-around great Pokemon, and the addition of heavy-duty boots and access to Nasty Plot makes it a menace to deal with. Not to mention, it's just a great U-turn user. He also went with round 2 Iron Hands, which some might consider a stretch, but this Pokemon has proven to be nothing but reliable and impossible to kill in one shot, while also dealing a tremendous amount of damage back. Skeledirge is also a personal favorite of mine, as with the potential to Terra, it opens up the door for being an unkillable monster, whilst also boosting yourself up with Torch Song. Not to mention Unaware is just a crazy ability. The rest of his drafts consist of interesting picks such as Basque Legion plus Walking Wake, and Bisharp plus Makalola. Interesting to double up on typings as often as he did, but I have no doubt he's cooking. I lastly want to shout out 6-point Toadscroll, an extremely good Valley pick for what it can do, such as Rapid Spin and Leech Seed, and Spore. With the 11th pick in the DGBA, we have Hacker, coach of the Turn Down for Watch Roll, which is a very clever name. His first pick was Iron Bundle, which blows my mind that it went for this long in the draft to begin with. He was quick banned from OU for a reason, and that's because of the inherent power that is base 124 special attack and 136 speed. It hits like a truck and it's really hard to hit back. The meme with this Pokemon though is having it hit Hydro Pumps for it to be effective, which is half true. But this Pokemon shines in being able to potentially just clean up the game with Specs, Surf, or Ice Beam. Hell, you could even go Scarf to ensure nothing outspeeds you, except the Scarf, Dragapult, and the like. Speaking of, he paired his bundle with Hydreigon, Screamtail, and Iron Treads. I do like the Treads being able to kill bulkier steel types that might come in on Screamtail or Bundle, and I like the Screamtail to handle whatever might pressure the Iron Bundle. I used to think this Pokemon was pretty awful, but the amount of sets it can run is really impressive, but it stands out as being a great wall for whatever he designed it for. The picks after are also just really good Pokemon that can do whatever you need of them, such as Talonflame, Rotom-Mow, and Slitherwing. I'm not completely sold on Toxapex, but getting it round 6 I think is still a pretty good pickup all things considered. Speaking of, I want to give a shout out to Whiscash being drafted. Legit one of my favorite Pokemon ever, bro, but it's just unfortunately awful, and it desperately needs a buff. With the 12th pick in the draft, we have a certified legend of the format, a battler most players would consider to be at least top 5 of all time. We have the Gypsy King himself, coach of the Sydney Sharpedos. With his first pick, he decided to go with Regieleki, which is notoriously known for getting banned ASAP once it was released from its cage of restraint over at Nintendo. The opportunity to Terra to flip the table on what should be a quote-unquote easy counter, whilst also having that much speed and hard-hitting electric moves is truly an incredible tool for any team to have, let alone for the Gypsy King. He followed up with Urshifu Rapid Strike for his secondary wall breaker, which makes sense as it's able to really hurt the ground types Reggie doesn't like too much, while it's also U-turning to bring in Regieleki and potentially get a nasty Volt Turn Vortex rolling. I also really like the Dragon Steel Fairy Core of Goodra Histui and Enamorous Therian, two Pokemon with incredible defensive stats and offensive stats and can pretty much do whatever you want from them. His Valley picks of Mimikyu and Hawlucha plus Rillaboom are also great secondary options for winning offensively. Top it off with really decent walls in Uxie, Overqwil, and Palossand, and you have an extremely healthy looking team with a ton of different pathways to win many games. With the 13th pick in the draft, we have Genius X, coach of the Boston Bulldogs. He personally has become a really great friend of mine in the draft league since we have done multiple team tours together now, and almost every time we perform really well. He's also just a really damn good battler, and also considered to be one of the best battlers of all time. With his first pick, he picked up Zamazenta Crown, which seems like a really crazy Pokemon to allow at first glance, but is held back by always having to hold the Dauntless Shield, thus can never actually boost the attack any more than whatever EVs you invest into it, since it actually doesn't get any form of physical setup. His base stats are still absolutely incredible though, and the Fighting Steel forms a great offensive typing and a pretty decent defensive one too. He also paired Ting Lu with the already incredibly bulky Zamazenta, alongside Amoonguss and Azumarill to handle their fighting weakness. All of a sudden, you have a very healthy wall core that'll handle most teams every week. His offensive Pokemon of Scizor, Thundurus T, and Iron Jugulus are all really good as well, since they have a form of offensive momentum. I also want to shout out 2-Point Komala, A really good value pick for what it is, and could potentially come some weeks as a special wall wish passer or just a banned last resort user. With the 14th pick in the draft, we have a battler who I consider to be the greatest draft player to exist in the format. An OG of the game, and someone who has been at the top since the beginning. I present Zozo, coach of the BBC Kings. With his first pick, he went with the old reliable Garchomp, which has stood the test of time as one of the best Pokemon in the entire game. Offensively and defensively, it's just an incredible Pokemon. He offensively paired it with Sneasler and Zarude. Sneasler obviously being a great answer to bulky steals and fairies that annoys Zarude and Chop at times, and Zarude being one of the bigger anti-ground type Pokemon in the entire game, thanks to its ability to heal status and HP with jungle healing and having a massive stab power whip. Klefki and Gastrodon for his primary defensive core is really solid too, since they not only work well together, but pair well with Zarude and Chomp. This also gives Zozo 3 different Spikes users and 2 really good Stealth Rock users. The Tornadus pick is also a solid pickup, a really good speed tier that can obviously just fire Hurricanes or even bulk up Rest Acrobatic someone. 5-point Belly Bolt is also a really nice pickup that can seriously put in good work since it can soak ground types on switching. Similarly to Gypsy, another team that can forge many different pathways to victory. With the 15th pick in the draft, we have iPro, coach of the Tampa Bay JakeEngines. I don't know him a ton personally, but similar to the previous battlers, he's been around for a long time, and has always been really good at the game. With his first pick, he picked up Annihilate, which might stun people that it even lasted this long, but I think that's just on the sheer number of really good Pokemon available in the game. Obviously notorious for being incredibly bulky, and having its signature move Rage Fist pair perfectly in tandem with its bulkiness. Along with the potential to tear into the best defensive type possible, this Pokemon becomes crazy. He offensively paired it with Meowscarada, Sandy Shocks, and Iron Moth. All of a sudden, we have a team that looks like an early Scarlet Violet ladder team. Not only does he now have 2 really good Spikes users, but he has incredible pivot potential in the Meowscarada and Sandy Shocks, whilst also having a really good special wall breaker in Iron Moth. Defensively, he went with Diancie, Quagsire, and Corviknight. Weirdly enough, these are all in respective order, so it's almost like he drafted in the form of an offensive to defensive checklist. This now gives him 3 users of Spikes and 3 users of Stealth Rock, which is always incredibly healthy for a team to have malleability on Pokemon that can do those tasks. His last 2 picks being the Raincore picks are honestly really cool, as Choice Band Wavecatch Floatzel is absolutely insane. If only it got Flip Turn, it would really make that Pokemon next level in my opinion. With the final pick in the draft, we have Spoink, coach of the Des Moines Delibirds. I honestly don't know anything about him, but I know he's a coach who had good success last season, similarly to Ethan. Just like Ethan, I'm sure he wants to continue to ride that wave of success into the current season. With his first pick, he picked King Gambit, which is a Pokemon that's incredibly powerful thanks to Supreme Overlord, and decently bulky thanks to its really good defensive base stats and the potential to Terra. Since he was the last pick, he essentially had 2 first round picks, since the draft was a snake order draft. So he was able to immediately pair King Gambit with Enamorus, which needless to say is a really strong Pokemon. Whether it's contrary superpower, or just firing off raw Moonblast from its base 135 special attack, it's able to perform offensively however you desire. And unlike its Darien form, it has a much better speed stat to be a better team wrecker. For his defensive Pokemon, he went with Hippowdon, Alomomola, and Tikaton, which gives him 2 good Stealth Rock users and nice switch-ins to types such as Fire and Ice. Admittedly, the rest of the draft feels a bit lackluster, but that's not to say Pokemon like Inteleon, Armourouge, Bravian Hisui, or even Iron Leaves won't work, but it feels like they fill a space that wasn't really needed. But I would love to be proven wrong. I do really love the Ursaring and Oricorio picks though. Ursaring being able to run a Violite now makes it a really bulky Pokemon, whilst also having the ability to still run Guts or Quick Feet, which still obviously very much tears teams apart. Oricorio was given Quiver Dance as well in this generation, which gives it set up for the first time. Paired out with being able to choose between 4 different types, and you have a decent Pokemon in your hands. And with that, that rounds up the DGBA roster. For those who are still with me, I appreciate watching to this point, but there's still one more rule I need to discuss, and that's Terrazolizing. How do you determine who gets to do it? Well, certain Pokemon are outright banned from being able to Terra, as it makes them competitively unfair. And these Pokemon include Chienpao, Dragonite, Dragapult, Zamazenta Crown, Palafin, Iron Valiant, Spectre, and Roaring Moon. Second, the selection of Terra on a Pokemon increases their subjective base value on the board. So for example, Regieleki was only 9 points in the draft board, but with Terra, it increases to a 25-point Pokemon, which makes the draft not only more constricting, but also more calculated if you truly want the best team. And each team can have up to 2 Terra potential Pokemon, which means you can only have one if you'd like. Without further ado, let's show the Terra captains. For Glop, we have Terra Zapdos and Terra Lilligant Hisui. For Bronson, we have Terra Baxcalibur and Terra Spafra. For 100p, we have Terra Salamence and Terra Mew. For Toxic, we have Terra Ursaluna and Terra Gyarados. For Astor Jay, we have Terra Chi-Yu and Terra Thundurus T. Or no, just Thundurus, excuse me. For Paranox, we have Terra Ceruledge and Terra Lycanroc Dusk. For Habita, we have Terra Arcanine Hisui and Terra Haxorus. For Ethan, we have Terra Volcarona and Terra Orform. For Troy, we have Terra Urshifu and Terra Landorus T. Specifically Urshifu Single Strike. For Skyhorse, we have Terra Tornadus T and Terra Skeledirge. For Hacker, we have Terra Iron Bundle and Terra Hydreigon. For the Gypsy King, his only Terramon is going to be Regieleki. For Genius X, we have Terra Thundurus T and Terra Scizor. For Zozo, we have Terra Zarude and Terra Sneasler. For iPro, we have Terra Annihilate and Terra Iron Moth. And for Spoink, we have Terra Iron Leaves and Terra King Gambit. That about wraps up the introduction. From here, I will probably be reviewing each battle individually and uploading them as a spectator, just analyzing the teams and gameplay. But I will also try to have some other flashy segments and shows on the side. If you enjoyed this content, I'd really appreciate a comment, and let me know how I can continue to make this content even better. I'm your trainer Josh, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. See ya.